it did finally get through the system. And then since then, it had been about every year and a half or so as we were evolving new ideas and other perspectives. Right now, it's still, here's generally what the rules are. And if good providers know you, they can tailor it because they kind of know who you are. So you really want to make sure that everybody is involved in whatever you're doing and putting whatever that solution together is, and push it to learn where the limitations are. Push it to where, we really need that human intervention. What I'm seeing happening, and it happened with me, I get a result back and I went, what is that over there?
If we could dive in then, you mentioned your background in film and a transition into health tech, which isn't the most common kind of career path. Could you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
I've been fortunate where I had, having produced, as I said, for about 20 years, some film and television. And I was expanding the area into the area of education and training, figuring let's take some of the tools that I did in traditional entertainment and film and apply that to the education training area. And one of my clients was GlaxoSmithKline. Now, the perspective is important here. This is 2005. And I was looking at seeing what was done and working in terms of, again, with Glaxo was something on type 2 diabetes and how pervasive it was and how pervasive it was going to be. And being a father who had 4 young kids at the time was going, well, this is crazy, especially type 2 diabetes that's preventable. This is going to be very expensive, very difficult for everybody, but very expensive, frankly, the healthcare system. And my kids are going to be paying higher taxes and higher fees as a result of something that's preventable. So I was going, okay, what's being done here? Who's in charge? And a lot of cool solutions, but very few people were using them. So being a card-carrying, arrogant producer, I went, well, all you got to do is come up with a solution that ties to people's lifestyles. And they will, use it and be more open to using it, and that'll solve diabetes. And I figured, it took me about 10 minutes, and I think I've solved diabetes. What else could I do today in one of my merry way? And about 6 months later, remember, 2005, I was working with Universal McCann, the advertising agency, with a cell phone provider, Motorola, on this newfangled device called the StarTAC phone, which was the first flip phone that was in mass production. Really cool device after the brick. And talking to the engineers, and they're going, you're not going to believe this, but sometime in the future, remember 2005, you're going to have programs on the phone, like telling the weather. And we're going, you guys are crazy. You're not going to tell the weather with a phone. Who'd want to use their phone for programs? You want to use a phone as a phone, which shows how smart I was in 2005. Literally later that evening, about 3:00 in the morning, working actually on both projects, I kind of went, maybe cell phones are going to be that lifestyle device that people are going to use to manage their diseases. And literally that set me on my way. I filed my first patent. Crazily, I now hold 8 patents based on those original ideas. But it evolved into building a cloud-based communication platform to allow people to communicate better, particularly patients and providers.
I love so this is maybe one of the positive outcomes of diabetes that it took you down that route into more innovation.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to explore more of. So I know your sort of tagline, the way you look at tech and health, is that technology enables, humanity heals.
Correct. Yes.
Can you expand a little bit more on that and talk about how that applies in balancing those two things in the world of healthcare?
It's actually crucial, and I have to be honest, it took me years to come up with that, to sort of say, how do I, in a simple manner, kind of explain what my mission has been, what the mission of my companies have been. And really, it's part of the problem is there's lots of tech out there. But the reality is, if you depending who you talk to, what we've considered the success rate of technology is around 25% at best in terms of implementation of new technologies. And part of the problem has been and continues to be is everyone's looking at technology as a solution. If you build it, they will come. But the reality is technology is an enabler. It allows you, it's a tool, it allows you to do things better. And in order for it to work better, you actually have to involve the stakeholders. So in terms of health tech, as an example, you need, if it's going to help patients, you need to involve the patients, you need to involve the caregivers, you need to involve the nurses, the providers, the techs, everybody in that patient journey who are affected by that technology or the elements that they need to make sure it's actually providing and doing what they need to do. In a lot of cases, I'm sure you've heard many examples where people have implemented technology and it takes things from going 1 step to 5 steps or 5 steps to 25 steps. It actually takes more time because of technology than it was before the technology. And so that's why it's sort of it's that delineation, sort of go, look, you got to understand technology is just a tool, and understanding people is how the tools are effective and makes it work.
Could you drill down a little bit on that? You have a mantra, technology enables, humanity heals. And you gave us one example with type 2 diabetes. But what else does that look like in practical terms when you're architecting digital products for patients and providers?
Fundamentally, we've had a discussion about how to use elements from one industry to another. In this case, one of the things I took from my film business background is focus groups. So it's not just saying here it is, it's actually in the development of the solutions from the start through the completion. It's actually it's creating focus groups and back to the stakeholders, making sure we're actually providing them with what they need. And because everyone has different needs. So it's involving the people who are going to be affected at every step of the process. Now, it takes longer to do that. And frankly, it's more expensive to do that. But the savings is on the other side is you have the implementation actually has success. So you're not tweaking after the fact. It's actually, you have a considerably higher success rate of implementation when everyone already knows what's to be expected of them and that they're getting what they need when they need it.
Can you share if you've got any kind of specific examples of where you might have reduced a complex process into something a bit more intuitive or simple for the end users?
I think a very simple example, again, is early on, is building in terms of workflows, in terms of how people respond. So again, that mentioned the original communication platform that I invented. And I use it with small I because I think it's just crazy, the fact that they actually awarded patents on these things. But it really, what it was designed to do was take away the barriers of communication. Like one of the biggest issues were how do people communicate with each other? How do patients and their providers communicate? And in many cases, the system has been and continues to be if you look at a lot of areas, is they say, okay, to do this, you have to communicate this way. So you need to have this app, you got to download this, you got to go through a whole process, which is being demanded by the provider or whoever the solution provider. Well, coming from my background of communication, that's the greatest way of ensuring you're not going to have communication because that's your barrier. So I looked at it the other way, which is to take away the barriers, let the patients determine how they're going to communicate. So in terms of complexity, so the system I built was patients can use whatever device they wanted. So it could be a cell phone, could be a computer, could be an app, could be a landline if they wanted. And it worked seamlessly for them, regardless how they did it. And even if they wanted to change from a cell phone to a landline or to the computer in real time, it just did that. And without a need of an app or anything else, it worked what was ever native. And I'm not going to get geeky on you as to how that happened. But the idea is to spend all that time behind the scenes, build this complex means of communication so that when a patient spoke or communicated, it was just, they weren't bogged down by having to change technologies or bogged down by having to go through all kinds of steps to make sure that they communicate the way they wanted to.
You've mentioned the harder that you hear no, the more likely you're onto something. And there's a need for balance as well, balancing tenacity and grit with trusted mentors' counsel. What's your go-to strategy for distinguishing between a no that means pivot versus a no that means push harder?
That's a very good question. And it is hard. There's obviously no hard and fast rules as to how that works or why that works. Part of it is just your vision and your mission of where you want it to go. So I think when it came mission wise, you could certainly double down on, look, this is the mission of what I want to do. When it comes to the how and the whys and understanding the barriers, that's where you got to sort of keep an open ear to those who've got more experience. And if you're smart, you'd have an experienced group of advisors to sort of go, okay, this is a harder route. Here's an easier route. But you got to be true to that guide stone, that lodestone. What is your guiding principle that are pushing you? And definitely sort of lean in onto that.
I'm sure that probably, but you've mentioned a couple of the patents that you have or your involvement there. I think you said you have 8 in total?
Yes, so far.
So I'd imagine that getting a patent is not an easy or simple thing to do. I'm sure there's complexity to that process. Could you expand a little bit for some of our audience that might be exploring patents for themselves or maybe intellectual property protection? especially around emerging tech? How does that work, and what's been your experience?
To be honest, I didn't originally go for I actually didn't want to go for patents originally because it is an expensive and can be a long process, depending on what it's doing. But because I was a solopreneur to start with when I came up with this idea, it was recommended to get a patent pending just because at least it had delineated there's some intellectual property involved. And then once I had, filed originally, they went, well, why don't you go further? My first patent took 8.5 years to get, in part because there's several tests to a patent. One is it novel and is it obvious? Though it satisfied both, basically the patent office said, regardless, you're crazy, and kept on saying no. Now this is a very simplification of a very complex legal. So my attorneys are probably rolling already, ready to call me. It was just a very long process to get the first because it was rather novel in terms of the element and what we're trying to, the original idea. But it did finally get through the system. And then since then, it had been about every year and a half or so as we were evolving new ideas and other perspectives in terms of the patents themselves, because we used our core patent as the precedent in terms of what gets approved. Again, it's an expensive process, and the value is it can be very expensive to defend. The real value of patents is to demonstrate a uniqueness of your idea. So when you're speaking to either investors or prospective clients, is to sort of demonstrate, look, this is a unique idea, and I actually use it more on the marketing side than anything else.
So it's kind of like an Academy Award?
Of sorts, yes. It sort of shows here's distinguished, here's something that's different, here's something that's unique. Quite honestly, when you're in a competition for specific contracts, if you're an RFP of some sort, when they're asking for certain criteria, if your patent covers those criteria, you can sort of demonstrate to the contracting officer, say, everyone may say they can do it. I'm the only one who's got the IP on it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for expanding on that. You are a mentor for multiple organizations, Global Affairs Canada, the Forum, University of Toronto's Hatchery. We talked a little bit about cross-pollination of knowledge and strategic relationships. How should small business owners and startup founders go about finding the right mentors or advisors or partnerships? And what's the best way to leverage their guidance for impact rather than distraction?
Again, another good question. So the thesis I have in terms of the mentorship and the various things that I've done is based on a great fact that came across a number of years ago, or presented as fact. I think my experience is probably quite true. Is 80% of innovation in any industry comes from outside that industry. So for me, success is not just, it's nice to have cross-pollination. To me, it's crucial in terms of success in any industry that you're in, and to get the diversity of insight to be able to build your business and frankly get a more unique perspective as you're building yourself out as that business. As to where, there's actually a wide variety of sources that do provide it. Part of it depends is what you're looking for. Are you specific to, like you mentioned, Global Affairs Canada? That's because I work with companies who want to expand to other countries, having worked in other countries in terms of this particular case, Canadian companies. University of Toronto Hatchery, that's specific to engineering oriented pieces. The Forum is women entrepreneurs who are looking to get into business. So these are sort of little niche areas who very kindly asked me to be part of helping some of their clients in doing those pieces. It's similarly, it's what are you looking for as a business, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, in terms of the kind of support that you need. Because there's a number of innovation groups in US and Canada that can provide those kind of supports.
So you mentioned with the cross-pollination looking to other sectors and other industries to aid innovation. What would you say to if an SMB is aiming to break into the healthcare sector, what trends should they be looking at? And should they be looking at trends just within the healthcare sector, or should they be looking at trends from other sectors as well to be able to break in?
It's a very good question. I think the first thing to understand, and I think this goes across any business, but because obviously it's healthcare for the past 20 odd years, is to remember, if you've got an idea for healthcare, there's at least 10 other people who have the exact same idea at the exact same time who are trying to do the exact same thing. So it's up to understand you really aren't that unique, regardless on the idea that you have. In terms of where you look, you absolutely should look to large organizations like obviously HIMSS, HIM, SS, and the healthcare group is one of the largest healthcare organizations in terms of associations that are out there. So go to their website, their papers to sort of see who's doing what. Following online in terms of a number of newsletters that talk about healthcare innovation. So in terms of those of the paper, but absolutely look around the world as to what's happening. Because that actually gives you more insight. Like, quite honestly, there's some technologies I now am involved in that I've actually working with partners in Europe that I'm bringing to North America because they're not as advanced in North America as they are in Europe. In other cases, there's North American elements that are much more advanced than the European environment, or in certain cases, or the third world. So you really need to have that global perspective on it all, and the understanding that your idea is not going to be unique, but there could be very interesting niches that you could bring to the table. And it does require the research. It does look at, look who are the main organizations, who are the key thought leaders. When I first came up with my idea, to be honest, I did a lot of research as to who the thought leaders were. And my outreach was for them to convince me not to do it. In part because I had a fairly good living and business in the film business, but I was sort of going, this idea kept them gnawing at me. So I kind of wanted to get out of my system, and I reached out to these thought leaders to hopefully convince me not to do it. As one had said one day, he sort of said, "I've got bad news for you. I think you're onto something." And that led to the Odyssey. To be honest, what created the full crossover was one of my first clients was working with an NGO out of California, working with veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress and were high-risk suicidal. And 3 weeks into our first utilization, I got a call from the executive director who said, "Howard, I just want to call to say thank you." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, your technology helped save someone's life tonight." And I just started swearing at poor Fred and yelling at him for about a half an hour to finally got a word in. He says, "Why are you so mad? I thought you'd be happy." He said, "You have no idea." He said, "I'm overwhelmed and thrilled by this. But also, I thought this was going to be a business good. I thought, sure, this could be a social good, but never did I think this would be something that can contribute to helping to save someone's life." Now, the fact that it's done at once, I have to see if I could save one more life because I couldn't sleep otherwise. And so I had to basically quit film and just said, I got to do this again. And so that kind of became, the passion.
That's really powerful. Once you realize that you have a responsibility through your ability to see it through, that's a dubious honor to be in that position. You mentioned the competition, the fierce competition that can happen when you have an idea in healthcare, 8 or 10 other people have the same idea at the same exact time. Another challenge that healthcare entrepreneurs face is juggling regulatory requirements with speedy development and innovation. How do you maintain creativity and rapid product iteration in healthcare while ensuring compliance and patient data security?
Yeah, when you sort of put creativity and regulatory in the same sentence, a bit of an oxymoron. It's the long game you have to look at for these things. And it is, to your point, extremely hard at times to be able to balance out the two, especially when trying to bring in something innovative that doesn't quite fit in the regulatory holes as they do. Quite honestly, part of what I built when I first, 2005, it was utilizing text messaging, which then people look at me like it was crazy. Like, what is text messaging? No one's going to use text messaging. Why are you dealing with something like this that no one's going to use and is not secure? It's and had not to do with my doing whatsoever, but it became as ubiquitous as I suspected it would become. But also dealing with the regulatory element of using something like text messaging. How do you deal with it? And so for me, it was extremely creative exercise. And it's an answer to your question is, okay, what are the regulatory parameters? When I put it all together and the HIPAA regulations first came out, I actually met with 3 of the authors of the HIPAA regulation so I could understand what, not only what it was, but to understand the spirit and the intent of it all. And then when I went back to my developers, we wanted to make sure that we built that spirit and intent into what we did. Now, it was a different way of doing it than others had done it, but we wanted to make sure we incorporated that. So we kind of leaned into the issues at hand. So it's not saying, oh, yeah, you don't have to worry about security and privacy. It was, oh, you absolutely have to worry about it, and here's how we deal with it. So again, back to the focus groups, we kind of built that in. Also, we had a focus group, regulatory focus group, to sort of build that into the solution to be able to lean into some of those issues to satisfy it all.
I think this is one of the interesting areas about AI, not just in healthcare, but across the world at the moment, is that it's moving quicker than our regulation is catching up with at the moment, which is potentially great for innovation and creativity. Like you said, potentially creativity and regulations don't go so well together. Where do you see AI working in the healthcare space, and especially health tech? And what do you think in terms of the most immediate opportunities for SMBs in that space?
Okay, I'll go to the far end of that rainbow where I say where I think this ultimately will go in something that's been talked a lot about, which is precision medicine, which I'm sure you've heard. It's not a new term. But what the utilization of these tools will allow you to do is to drill down to individual needs and individual care plans and individual responses to my specific need, because mine is different from yours, is different from my kids. So you'll actually be able to realize that, because it's going to be able to take the fire hose of data that you create on a daily basis and actually be able to craft solutions, or not. You may be perfectly healthy, but craft interactions and craft your plan based on your specific responses, on your specific results, on how you are on a health-wise basis. Right now, it's still here's generally what the rules are, and if good providers know you, they could tailor it because they kind of know who you are. But with AI, it'll actually be able to drill down to specifically, because the providers are already at the stage, they can't deal with all the data coming in. They could, to give you an idea, what is it, 2023, if I might be wrong, maybe 2022, there was 3,000 exabytes of health data created around the world. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with how large exabyte was. I wasn't until I heard. Basically, it's a billion trillion, and it's increasing at 35 to 40% a year. And that's because of all the data that we have, high image resolution, things off our watch, off of all the various devices. So we cannot humanly manage all that as any individual. So that's where what they're calling AI, basically it's just number crunching. So these great number crunching solutions can help bring into that whole idea of precision medicine. To your question, Becky, on the second part of the question, which is what can SMBs do today? Really, it's understanding the guardrails and understanding the problem of the algorithms that are being created and the biases within those. And okay, how do we deal within the guardrails? How do we deal with that fire hose of data? How do we provide unique perspective for the individuals? Understanding at the end, you need that human element. Again, to the commentary about technology enables, humanity heals. All these things are enablers. So AI agents that we're very much involved in healthcare provide the provider, the clinician, with all the data and insight and analysis based on their rules for them to be able to go to the next step and say, okay, this is what we need to do.
It's quite exciting where that can take us.
Oh, it's really exciting, but quite honestly, also very scary, because it's that very thin rail that it's on, really easy to fall off because of AI agents or technologies or ChatGPT that you have, the hallucination. So you get results that are just hallucinated results, and you have how do you know whether it's a true result or not?
Definitely good points. There was a podcast I saw with Dr. K, who hosts a very popular Healthy Gamer podcast. He's, I believe, he has his degree in psychology, I believe.
Yeah.
And he was talking about like the recommended daily allowances for different minerals and vitamins and stuff like that we take. As a consumer, you kind of see it, you trust that a government organization or some higher authority has done the required research to ensure that you'll be healthy. But he was saying that's all based on averages.
Yeah.
And so it's already suboptimal. like
Yes.
built in. Like maybe it's better than nothing on average, but what would it mean if everyone had hyper personalized healthcare? It's exactly what you need, exactly what you need, Howard, exactly what you need, Becky. We don't know what that would look like. It could be an exponential improvement for our species, no?
Well, absolutely. Using your example, we just a bottle of Advil. It sort of says, if you're an adult, so if you're over 12 years old, if you're under 12, no more than one. If you're over 12, no more than two every 4 hours, every 8 hours, whatever the case may be. I'm not a big guy, but I'm 6'1", about 200 odd pounds. My daughter, is 5'5", and 120 pounds. We have the same guidance on taking our Advil. To your point, going, yeah, there's wiggle room in there. And so to that point, the more precision oriented you can get, where you go, well, this is actually what you need. And based on your metabolism, based on so many factors, because there's so many other elements to taking medication that become really important.
You obviously know better than I, but I'm curious also what I've discovered in business and life, the knock-on effects. Like often we're looking to make decision A and B, but what if decision C and D and E and F and all of that were all optimized, all hyper-personalized? Like what kind of path would that take us on? It's not always just a matter of going through one of two doors. It's like going through infinite hallways of mirrors that one is optimized and one is a law of averages.
Yeah, it's an infinite tree diagram is kind of where it just expands out exponentially. And so that's why everyone started talking about all these things. We are so early days on all of this. Yeah, we've not even started up the curve when it comes to utilization of all these tools. We're just still in what we're calling the AI stage, which is machine language and machine learning. It hasn't really gone anywhere. Generative AI is really the real generative AI, which is where it's actually doing some quote unquote thinking. We're not even really there yet, as opposed to number crunching. So to the point where we're getting that massive expanse of, we're still a fair way away of truly doing that. And so it's quite honestly, it's where can it go? It almost becomes incomprehensible in terms of all those various routes it can go and the ramifications of it, because all we know is what we know, and we don't know what we don't know. So to your point is, you got to start running all the algorithms to say, okay, what are the implications of this or this? Is basically everybody having their own weather computer program that the National Weather Service uses to calculate, the weather patterns, which is looking at all the permutations and combinations and saying what's most likely. Like, we're still in the averaging business.
There's an interesting, I don't know, like it seems like a logical fallacy kind of that I observe anyway in my life. I guess I'll speak for myself, where you want something you can't get and you expect that you'll achieve it by doing what you already know. So like kind of going back to what you said, you don't know what you don't know. I remember, I think it was Gary Kasparov, the chess champion. I forgot his name exactly. Apologies.
It's Gary Kasparov. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So, and then the Go champion, I think a year or two after him, they were developing these AI computers to beat the best humans at these games, chess and Go, because they were seen as good benchmarks for complexity and the right amount of logic and creativity, etc. And the humans kind of held their own for a while. And that was until they didn't. And then once they didn't, it was like a Mercury switch where it's just like, boom, like humans don't stand a chance. And as I understand it, a couple of things I think are interesting. The time compression, like the computer in a year was playing more matches than all of humanity could in all of humanity's time. And the other thing was, it was teaching itself. So it was making moves that the engineers couldn't understand. And they said it was like watching an alien intelligence. And when you mentioned we don't know what it'll look like, I think that's very true. In order to cure cancer, in order to fly or, expand in the cosmos or whatever it is that we're trying to do, if we can't do it yet, there's a high likelihood it's not going to look like what we expect, or we can't really expect what it'll look like. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, absolutely. We certainly can't really know what the future will look like, the certain parameters of time. But to your comment on the computer, what was interesting in terms of those programs is, yes, they're doing things, and they weren't, they were learning not in the, I guess in the traditional sense, where they realized the learning was, if I do this, I seem to be winning more than I'm not. So it starts incorporating that. So it's a logic and throwing stuff at the wall, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to come up with a brand new hyper way of doing it. It's just, all it is throwing numbers and saying, 9 times out of 10, this works better. I'm going to use this. But what's happened with now that, which is really interesting, particularly with the Go, and actually it's chess as well, the humans playing them have said, oh, I've not seen that move before. So the humans are doing the actual learning from the computers. And as a result, I think we're now starting to see humans are actually becoming a bit more of a match again for the computers, because the humans have been learning from the computers, but the computers can only do what they've been taught, where the humans have the capacity to go beyond that. It's like the discussion of traditional chess and three-dimensional chess, when you've got to sort of think of different planes.
Following that thread and coming back to healthcare, because I think especially within healthcare, there's a human touch that I'm not sure that we'll ever be able to tech our way out of, based on the end user. I went to a conference about AI about 3 or 4 years ago, so it's very, very out of date as to where we are technologically. But a poll was put to the audience, and I think there was a few hundred of us, and 80% of the audience around said that they would prefer to still speak with a doctor who had a lower percentage chance of diagnosing them accurately than speaking with a machine or interacting with a machine that had a much higher chance of diagnosing them accurately. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that, from taking the more accurate diagnosis, let's use tech to be better healthcare providers, but also the human demand that we have as end users, and how do we balance those things?
It depends. Really, and when I say it depends on what you're communicating with the clinician for. So, for example, the work that I did, again, the communication platform automated a lot of the processes, automated a lot of the workflows. And we sort of found on about 87% of the time, people were very happy communicating on an automated basis with the system. It was responsive to them and gave them the responses they need. So personalized the responses for the particular needs, but they're fully aware there was an automated system. 13% of the time, they needed to talk to a clinician. So the system was designed that in those circumstances to actually do outreach to a clinician for them. And so the whole idea is there's a time and place when, I really don't want to talk to anybody. I'm just got to give them, I got to give them results, got to give them my weight, got to give my blood pressure. I don't need to talk to anyone about that. But I've got this real pain on my back. I really like to talk to somebody about that. So it comes down to the circumstance and the need. And that back to the humanizing, that touch when I talk to my doctor, who I've been had for oddly almost, I guess it's 40 years now, the same doctor. He knows me. So if I say I've got a particular pain, it's not like I got to go through a whole long list. We'll fill out these forms. He just knows me to sort of go, okay, Howard, you know what? You're 40 years older when I first met you. That's why you got a pain in your back. And that's the right diagnosis. It's not, oh, well, you should do this, you should do that. And so you ultimately, to your point, you need that human touch to it all. Not all the time, but there's a time and place for that human touch. And I really talk about the algorithms where David were talking earlier. I just can't foresee being able to create that element of humanity into an algorithm.
And there's different models and also different on-ramps or barriers to adoption. So something might seem a little scary, but when you see your friend do it, all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe I can do it after all. Or when I first heard about self-driving cars, I thought I might prefer to drive myself because I enjoyed driving and I wanted to become an even better driver. And, maybe I could drive faster with new technology or something like that. And now I say, bring it on. I'd love to read a book or meditate while a car is going 200 miles an hour with like zero chance of an accident. It just, I could go drive like people would shoot a gun at the gun range. I could go drive at like the racetrack on the weekends if I really want to get my jollies. But for like my daily life, higher like speed, higher efficiency, better health, etc. It just seems like my thinking has changed somewhat with some new thoughts, some new introductions to new ideas. And so I'm wondering if the role of having an artificial, let's say, or a non-human care provider or care system, I suppose it would be, perhaps has an element of the human touch, but maybe it's augmented like an exoskeleton by the artificial, and the human might be the interface, and then it's assisted 90, 95, 99, 99.99%. by the machines?
Oh, absolutely. Quite honestly, the work that I'm doing, that Mission AI Agents, is exactly that, where it's doing all the behind the scenes for the clinicians that they normally have had to do. Like in terms, and this is not the sales pitch. It's just like in the oncology area, it's saving oncologists working about an hour a day at administration time, and what's actually opened up for them is more time with the patient, because it actually does all the behind the scenes analysis using all their protocols. So when they see the patient, it actually has all the information broken out exactly how they want it, the analysis of the past tests and comparatives. So when they're with the patient for 15 minutes, as opposed to spending 14 gathering information and 1 minute talking, it's now 1 minute of reviewing the information and 14 minutes talking. To your automated car thing, and it's a bugaboo for me, I love the idea of the self-driving car until such time as there are no humans driving on the road. I'm staying on the human side, because to the point, but back to it, it's, and actually it ties, it's actually not being facetious. It's because you cannot program the human mind. And having grown up in environments where you've had absolutely insane drivers, there is just no way you can program some of the crazy things people do on the road. And no matter how careful the algorithms are in the automated cars, for example, you're not going to be able to program everything into it. So I think that self-driving cars are going to be phenomenal once it's 100% self-driving.
We can't program the craziness of humans, nor can we
That's right.
program
You
the
can't program
empathy or the
crazy.
yeah. And you, to a point that you referenced earlier, we also can't program empathy, these kind of core human qualities, be it for good or bad, that the qualities that we have. Being somebody that's involved in tech, but the humanization of it, what strategies would you recommend for not going in deep into technology for technology's sake and keeping that element of empathy?
It really ties back to what we said before. So obviously, from the side, despite on top of experience, it is that focus group side. It's, you know what, who are your intended clients? And like, for example, in terms of any technology, well, the doctor's my client. He said, but ultimately, it's a patient is the ultimate client for anybody in the health system. So you really want to make sure that everybody is involved in whatever you're doing and putting whatever that solution together is, and to learn and push it to learn where the limitations are. Push it to where, oh, we really need that human intervention. You know, anyone who's worked with an IT department knows that the second you go into production, within hours, the client's going to break the damn thing. And you go to your IT department and you say, oh, they're using it wrong. And then the response should not be they're using it wrong. The response should be, oh, we didn't take that into account. And so back to the original discussion we had about, you know, technology enabling, that's what the mindset's got to be. It's not they used it wrong. It's they used it exactly as they're going to use it. You programmed it wrong or you built it wrong, not taking into account how it's going to be used.
The world's unfair versus I'm not playing it right.
Exactly. That's a very good way of putting it. Yes.
Developing complex products, bringing them to market requires alignment across cross-functional teams, technology, operations, sales, and customer-facing roles. Could you walk us through your process for keeping diverse teams aligned and motivated, especially when juggling multiple deadlines and client needs?
The key thing is being clear that everyone understands the goal, what you're trying to do, and to make it a complex goal, but making sure that this is what we want to do, this is what we want to accomplish, acknowledging the difficulty of it and the need for the complex pieces. Be honest, in many of the things we've come together with, the first reaction from teams were, you've got to be kidding. It's also enabling the challenge to understand, okay, well, maybe maybe it sounds like we've got to be kidding, but no, that's exactly what we want to do. And make that challenge and have the teams that relish the challenge of putting these things together. The biggest concern I have is when we don't have these challenges. That hasn't been the case, but it's just down the road. It's the challenge that drives the team. Again, it comes down to the teams you put together. The challenge of the IT teams to do this, the challenge of logistics to make sure actually everything is working where you need it to be, the challenge for the sales team to sell something that's up and sold before.
So if we think across SMBs, across all industries, they might have a particular mission in mind and they need everybody clear on that. In order to reach that mission, there's going to be some alignment of technology and the human side. And so far in this conversation, we've talked about many different elements of that: regulation, creativity, AI, managing teams. What would be maybe the top 2 or 3 takeaways you would want our audience to get for how they can better align technology with real human needs?
Oh, so the first one would be, as we talked about, the first element is just making sure everyone's aligned to the objective. If you don't have that lodestone to say this is where we're going, you've got a difficulty, because that allows you to have a wide range of approaches if you're all going in the same direction. The other one is to, and this is to your previous question, David, is making sure the teams feel empowered to look beyond where they've necessarily looked before, to go outside of those bounds, to sort of explore new areas and say, well, what's going on there? Or have you heard about this? Or to not be afraid to try different things. Throughout my career, even in the film side, in playing with technology, a lot of it's come from going, I heard about this, or have you thought about that? Or, well, there's no way this is going to work, so we got to find a different solution. Like, to be honest, the early days of my technology, we needed to experiment with it. And we went to the various telecommunication companies, and one said, okay, it's going to cost you $75,000. Another said it's going to cost you $150,000. Another one said $250,000. They said, no, I'm an old film producer. I do things for $1.25. And then one of my tech guys went, well, I heard out of South Africa, they're doing this, and it's 25 euros. The exact same thing we needed was going to be 25 euros. And so we said, okay, let's build to that. And it cost me 25 euros as opposed to 250,000 or 50,000, depending which way you went. And there was a loss of 16 milliseconds time-wise in what we needed to do. And it led to actually building our entire solution a completely different way when we realized this is instantly global, when we were thinking is going to be, and it all came down to letting my guys sort of go, we got to figure something out. Let's figure out something crazy.
What's your ultimate vision for the next generation of healthcare innovators? And how can today's entrepreneurs contribute to that future?
I think they can contribute greatly, in part because the entrepreneurs today, we're all dealing at the trench warfare side of things. Like, we sort of see it much more granular basis and seeing issues on a more granular basis. And so therefore the ideas are limitless, particularly because, the generations now have access to more information than even the guys I dealt with in those early days when we're just discovering the internet, for example. So the input and the influence is huge, and therefore the opportunities are huge. The key thing is, understanding of what works in terms of engaging your respective client and making the customers that you're looking for. As to early discussion of AI is, we don't know what we don't know. So the opportunities are really quite wide in terms of what can or cannot work, because you don't know elements that are there. Like, for a very quick example was in some of the technology, one of our clients was the U.S. Armed Forces, the VA. We're dealing with female veterans, and particularly in women's health, those women who are suffering from post-traumatic stress and who are pregnant. And like 1,000 women at that time per day who were in that circumstance. And by their interactions of, and now just the hard statistic on that, there was a 78% chance of a suicidal event. Not successful, but 78% suicidal event. My honor, if you talked about honors earlier, was the fact that when we built that program, for the time people were in that program for a number of years, there was not one successfully recorded suicide for the women on our program. What it also developed, though, in terms of the information gathered, was the nurses said, by the way they're answering it, I think some of our women are homeless. And it turned out 5% of their population were homeless. They had no idea we're homeless, never told them. And so that opened a whole area for them in terms of collecting new forms of data to get a better understanding of their population, but also help them realize they didn't understand their population. And so, to your question, is the next, this next generation of entrepreneurs, and when I say generation, it's the business generation, not the age of the entrepreneurs. There's insights that are out there and opportunities that I couldn't even tell you right now that they're seeing, and they may not even realize are opportunities. But with technology and the tools that exist, there's terrific opportunities of taking advantage of being able to use them and to support individuals.
You said something that strongly resonated with me. They didn't understand their population. And I've kind of come and gone from my population a couple of times in my career. And I've realized layer after layer, it's like that Dunning-Kruger effect. Like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And I wonder if we ever truly understand our population, going back to your earlier point about the need for those outsider insights, 80% of innovation coming from outside your vertical. I just thought that was a really powerful and poignant way to wrap that up, not understanding their population.
As you know, there's so much for us to know, and there's so many nuances to an individual that, again, the information that you collect as clinicians is so small compared to what really is affecting them in their entire life. And these tools will help get that better understanding. But as that, I think we're just starting to scrape that surface on it all. Just a very quick example. I know our time is tight, but it just comes to very simple. Imaging, high definition imaging is phenomenal right now. But what I'm seeing happening, and it happened with me, I get a result back and I went, oh, what is that over there? That's concern. And it was a year of tests, and they realized, oh, I guess there's nothing to be concerned. And the realization was, well, previous x-rays were not done with that high resolution, so the technology is becoming more sophisticated and picking up more things than existed before. And so what they said, well, you have that spot, oh, there's trouble. It may not be trouble. It just may be how I've been since day one. And so it's being careful on the other side is being careful with the results, because maybe the result really is there's nothing there.
I feel the same way with cameras nowadays. You can see more of my wrinkles, and I'm pretty sure it's the camera's fault and not age.
Oh, it's absolutely the cameras. I can assure you. Yeah, it's definitely the camera.
Well, Howard, it was a real pleasure talking to you. We could easily have extended that by an hour or two, but perhaps we should put a pin in this first volume. Was there anything that we left open-ended that you'd like to close the loop on before we close today?
Really, it's, I think, from the discussion, I think with all the new tools that are out there, it's probably one of the most exciting times, particularly in health technology and other technology and health technology, in terms of the potential of what's out there. But similarly, it's one of the scarier times for the same reason, because of those tools and what can and cannot be done, and how easy it is for it to be done improperly as it is to be done properly.
It was a really fascinating conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights. Where should people follow you? You're all over the place. You've got a lot going on. You're active on LinkedIn. We'll put your LinkedIn profile in the description. Is there anywhere else you'd like to point us?
You know what? LinkedIn is probably the best place to try and sort of keep it, back to the simplicity. It's just find one home. And so it's LinkedIn is kind of where probably everything coalesces in one form or another.
Thank you, Howard. It was such a pleasure. And to David's point, I could easily talk to you for a few more hours and ask you loads of questions that would go down rabbit holes that would be very fun to go down. And I'm looking forward to potentially a follow-up conversation.
I look forward to it. It'll be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate to speak to you guys today.
Thanks.
Thank you, Howard.